this quote from Nietzsche. We probably discussed this before. This sort of God is dead, and people take that as a sort of a sticker, but they never take this next part. Is that, and I mean, I'm not going to quote it exactly, but it's like, and we'll wash our hands in blood for like quite some time, because again, it will create chaos.
Hi, Rickard. Welcome for another chat on Manifesto, Conversations on Masculinity.
Hi, Paul. Nice to see you again.
Great. Yeah, so we have been connecting once in a while. I think we mainly been speaking about violence and martial arts. Both of us have a background in doing some martial arts, and you're in the Swedish Home Guard, I'm in the Danish Home Guard.
Right.
And today we're going to talk about a growing problem, not only, especially in Sweden where you are. I think it's one of the places where you're seeing it the most, but in Europe in general. And especially connecting that to our role as men and the way we see masculinity in our society as well. And that's going to be around what we're seeing is a flood of Muslim immigration coming into our countries, really influencing many, many different things. And a real kind of like conundrum of like, what are we going to do about this? And especially our government seem to be scrambling to not know how to handle it as well. So can you tell us a little bit about like what's happening in Sweden these days? How's the situation looking like?
No, as you mentioned, we've had an influx of immigration, a huge influx of immigration the last 30 years, I would say. And the majority of that is from the Middle East, North Africa, and majority being Muslim, obviously Christians as well, but majority being Muslim. And if you look at it from a sort of ideological perspective, like these countries and from cultural values are quite distinct from the Swedish society, and obviously that creates friction. And when I grew up with a lot of friends from the Middle East and so on. There were never sort of any issues in terms of like discussing values. Obviously, we had different values, but when it's 1 out of 20 kids or 2 out of 20 kids, it sort of melts in, and so you can have these integration that actually works because it's sort of a dialectic. But when there's an influx of, I think now 10% of Sweden is considered Muslim, and I think by 2050 30% will be Muslim given the current rate. And then it creates what we've seen in some of the suburbs is you got sort of standalone societies that are not part of the Swedish societies, and to some extent don't want to be part of the Swedish society. And then you can ask whether, okay, you can always point fingers, it's their fault or our fault or whatever. But I think from a Swedish perspective, and I'm not a man of faith, so I can only see it from a sort of civil society perspective. I think we haven't really prepared ourselves to the fact that we've gone from very homogenic society. Everyone looks the same, thinks the same, talk the same, to a very pluralistic society where everyone is not necessarily thinking the same and not sharing the same values, etc. I think the biggest mistakes Sweden as a whole, and especially our politicians, have made, and it's quite sort of narcissistic almost in a way, where the thought has been, well, as long as they become Swede, everything will work out. But the question you have to ask is, why would they want to become a Swede or a Dane, for example? What do we have to offer as a society that is so sort of aspirational? And I fail to answer that question, to be honest, because looking at where we are in the society right now, where very much has been sort of, the state will take care of you, and we sort of put all faith in the state, you can see that the state is crumbling. So what do you have left? Well, family. Well, family has been sort of eradicated almost as a sort of entity. You don't believe in the core nuclear family. You don't believe in the extended family, because if your elders are older, well, you put them in a retirement home because you pay so much taxes so that the state will take care of them. Meanwhile, you have a sort of a culture and a sort of, whether you call it culture or religion, I think they're sort of intertwined, where family is number one, and sort of the rules of in some of these sort of immigration groups, clan is even a thing. Well, it's hard to compete with that when you have a secular society that sort of demands that, no, you are an individual and a single entity. You have to sort of, instead of submit to Islam or the religion, you have to submit to the state. And do we, I don't have a good answer to, okay, what do we offer instead, except for welfare and free school?
Mhm.
I mean, to me, that's not very, it's not very clear proposition, because in all people wants to belong. And in Islam, you have a clear belonging to, because Islam means submission. So you have a clear sort of faith that you submit to, and it's very practical. Like, this is what you eat, this is what you do, this is often you pray, etc., etc. And in Sweden, we have at the most midsummer dancing around the midsummer pole. Okay, I'm exaggerating, obviously, but I can understand.
There's ABBA as well, right? So you can sing Happy New Year on New Year's
Yeah,
Eve.
yeah, exactly. You can say Happy New Year's as well, but I can, I mean, to be self-critical of Sweden and us as a society, we haven't really made a proposition that is worth their while, especially looking into what I think we briefly touched upon it before, like, what is even a man and a woman? Well, in society today, they just passed a law that from the age of 16, you're allowed to choose gender, but you're not allowed to vote or even have a tattoo. To me, that is a farce and a hypocrisy. And of course, given that choice, well, what do you choose then if you're new to society? And yeah, again,
Oh, so
it's
that's been decided now in Sweden. Do you need your parents' permission to change gender, or can you just do that as a 16-year-old yourself?
I think you and this is the legal
Yeah.
gender. You can't, I don't think you're allowed to change your physical gender until you're 18. But as some people that sort of have detransition have also pointed out, that it's a slippery slope. Once you change your legal gender, you're almost sort of forced into a corner to follow through when you then turn 18. So there's a lot of debate around this. And for one, I'm very surprised that it's been the sort of the right-wing government that had pushed this through. And that, to me, also as a sign of times, how all these sort of norms that sort of we took for granted are now sort of being, loosened up very much.
Would you say that, I don't know, would it be too much to say, Rickard, that like all of this stuff happening has got you to kind of reconsider a little bit your perspective on religion, on Christianity and its role in society? I remember we had a debate maybe 3 years ago at the European Men's Gathering, where you said, regarding religion, the one thing I always follow is, what's the quote? I think it was, never go full retard, or something like that.
Yes, exactly.
I'm hearing like a slightly different tune from you a little bit. Or at least like definitely some deeper reflections about like how these culture and religion, as you said, are tied together and influence each other somehow.
No, I think I am sort of a reflection on, I as many other Swedes have sort of reflected upon so many things that we take for granted. We now have to deliberately think about and also choose. And I for one I've sort of really follow a lot of American podcasts where you can see there's an awakening in Christianity. You can see, for example, Jordan Peterson has been one of them, who's gone some former sort of a professor, philosophy professor or history professor, I don't know which one he is, discussing
psychology, actually.
Psychology, yes.
Clinical psychologist, yeah.
Yeah, and discussing religion as a concept to, I saw in the latest podcast, to really put faith in what he says, not only out of a pure clinical perspective. And I think that is the sort of dialectical turn of things that I think it was Kierkegaard, you're living in Denmark, who said that you can question all the way down to the very sort of smallest point, but at some point you also have to just put faith in. You have to choose to believe. And I think with everything that's going on, I think the world is probably more chaotic now than it's been. I don't, not necessarily saying it hasn't been chaotic before, but I think due to social media and information that's being scattered, there is no clear information hierarchy anymore. It's much more linear and democratized, so to say, which also helps the disinformation, especially now with AI. People turn to having clear boundaries again, and I like integrity. To me, is a word that is so seldom is used nowadays, because people are willing to jump to hoops and do anything for like, or to get a reach for their posts or whatever. I see it again working with brands. Even brands have lost their integrity, because integrity is about saying no to things. And I feel that's where we as a society has gone the complete opposite, to where it's like, yeah, of course you can be a kitty cat. True story, actually. A colleague of mine, his son is in his son's high school, there's a girl identifying as a cat. And when she was walking down the corridor, someone just yelled out meow. And they got sent into the principal office for harassment. And to me, that is complete gibberish and lunacy, that we're allowing these sort of schizophrenic norms that some people have to sort of be overarching, pure and simple common sense.
Yeah. So as a society, we've rejected the idea of an absolute truth. And we've kind of followed further and further down that road. And I think what we're discovering is that actually truth is, when you don't have an absolute truth, then you have your truth and my truth, then actually our truth can diverge far more than, and we've just been following that, the consequences of that. And I think we're just starting to see how crazy it can go. And I think that's part of what you're talking about as well. Like, that's part of the attraction of Islam, in that it actually has some clear definitions. I would say that actually, if you go into Islam, it's just as schizophrenic as some of the worst secular ideas that we have today, in its metaphysics and in its approach to what truth is. But at least according to what a man is and a woman is, it's pretty clear and simple, right? You know, it takes some ideas from Judaism and Christianity and establishes that. And I think that's a large part of the, you know, that's perhaps the primary area where we're seeing, you know, just what our ideas and what we agree about as a society dissolving at the moment today. And so that's why I was just on the train yesterday coming into where I live, and saw, like, you know, like a Danish woman with a hijab or, you know, full face covering on, with a big, really masculine Muslim guy. And he was a man, and there was 3 or 4 little kids running around with them as well, you know, and it was just so clear. It shone out of them as a couple, that there was a very clear idea of masculine, feminine, and there was something actually very attractive about it, I got to say, because because you can see, like, there's a clearly defined understanding and agreement and partnership. There's a dance between a couple, right? And that's something that they at least get right.
No, absolutely. No, I agree. I wouldn't never want my wife to wear a niqab or a hijab, but I understand the.
I'm not in any way saying I agree.
No. But I understand the appeal, because at least then, you know, like we know where we have each other. There's no debate, because like whether we should have, like, so many couples that I hear, secular couples that are in an open relationship. To me, it's like, but why even have a relationship? The whole point is commitment. And that's where I've sort of gone down again. At some point, you have to believe, you have to put your faith in something, make a stand for something, or fall for anything. And that's where I find myself more and more going full retard to sort of quote myself to sort of, but you have to put your faith in some things. And I do find myself finding more and more relevance in that talks of, like, Jordan Peterson, for example, like how he puts his sort of faith, and I find more and more it resonates with me more and more, so to say.
So what are you doing anything else right now, Rickard, than, like, you know, you watching some Jordan Peterson on YouTube? But I mean, so I'm an Orthodox Christian, as you know. And there's a balance of, you know, like, there's ideas, but there's also something about practice. So I don't know. For me, it's a very long way, because, you know, Christianity in Scandinavia is very much defined by churches which have been quite, you know, monopolized by the state as well. And so for us, Christianity is actually the people's church. It's the state church.
Right.
And these churches are perhaps even further down, you know, they're maybe driving the way in some ways, as far as, you know, the whole tolerance and inclusion agenda in many ways.
I would say the Protestant,
some conservative voices, I guess, for it.
Yeah, I would say the Protestant church in Sweden, at least, have gone so full retard the other way to use the same phrase, in the sense of like you don't even have to almost to the point where you don't have to believe in God as long as you come to church. It's become so inclusive that it sort of it doesn't even, like, there's no sort of substance left in what it means.
Yeah, well, here
to be
you don't
a
even have to come to
Christian.
church. Like, actually, just seriously, 2 weeks ago, I was encouraged to run for my local parish council and was told, you don't have to be a Christian. You don't have to come to church at all. You can just be a part of the parish council. That's how desperate they are for people to engage. And
Yeah.
this is an organization that uses billions of kroner on, like, you know, their buildings and their salaries to all of their employees, but they don't even, they're not even telling people they need to come to church anymore or even be a Christian,
And
let alone believe in God,
everyone
right?
gets a participation trophy. For me, that's, I think that goes back to what I mentioned about integrity. Integrity also means that you need to sacrifice something.
Yeah.
And in a time when, you know, people are not willing to sacrifice anything to gain something, to me, that's how 3-year-old sort of reasons. And I think too many adults aren't sort of willing to accept the responsibility of adulthood, but also responsibility of being a member of society. Because again, it's not about you, it's what you can provide to others that sort of gives you a value. And I'm not saying that sort of one has to be a slave to society, but to others, the only thing that sort of is matter to them is like, okay, how can you help me together build something together? Like we don't have to make it into the state. Like in the simple context of a village, like a person who only takes and never gives back, who's not willing to sacrifice themselves for others. I was listening to another podcast with Robert F. Kennedy, for example, mentioning like hunters in like these sort of very rudimentary societies, the great hunters. They always give the best parts to others, because even on a good day, they might, you know, even be able to hunt down a buffalo or whatever they need. And they know that, yeah, on the days that I don't sort of contribute, I will get back because I'm giving so much when I have. And I think that sort of mentality, again, like JFK said, his uncle, like, don't ask what you can do for you, don't ask what the country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, has completely gone lost in people's sort of mind frame of reference even.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're headed into difficult times, for sure. I think.
And I think that goes back to again where you mentioned like this Muslim man. He is a man. He knows that his prime job is to take care of his family and everything that comes with it. And I think that's where a lot of Swedish men, probably Danish men, they're not willing to accept that responsibility and that sacrifice that comes with it, because they still want to be sort of elusive and be equal, but like they don't realize that you're equal, but you do different parts. That's how you become equal. You bring different things to the table if you're in a relationship, but also to society. Like,
yeah. So I mean, you have an 18 and a 19-year-old children, right? They're heading off into the world today. You're a married man as well. How does one help, especially those kids as they're heading off into this? Give them clarity, and what are you thinking about? What are you struggling with at the moment?
For me, since I have a son and a daughter, you have different challenges, obviously. And I had 2 stepdaughters as well. They're a bit younger, so obviously different.
How old are they?
They're turning 11 and 14. So obviously they're in a different sort of part of their life. But if my daughter will now, well, she graduated high school and is now going to take a leap year or a year off before she goes into university. She is very sort of focused and goal oriented, so she knows what she wants to do. So there's a clear path for her. My son has a year left in high school, but and obviously I have sort of an influence there. So his mind is set on doing his military service after high school and then go off to university. And I think both are doing the right thing. I think especially for my daughter, there's a lot of I think girls, especially this age, they push themselves very hard, not only in terms of school. She's also part of the Swedish national team for jiu-jitsu, the junior team. And they put a lot of girls in general and women put a lot of expectations on themselves. So their expectations are super high. And that's why a lot of them also have suffered from lack of confidence and so on in later years. But for my son, I think it's, for me at least, the military service was a sort of a test of manhood, and I mean it in the best sense, because you're with other peers and you're being sort of led by an older man or older
And there's
men.
a very clear hierarchy, and there's very clear
Absolutely.
framework for what you're going to do, what
Yeah.
you're not going to do, and you just need to learn that. But you also need to think for yourself. But there's a structure within which
there's a structure, and you learn
for everything.
Yeah, exactly, and you learn that you're never stronger than the group. You learn that very quickly, that for you to be able to succeed, you have to rely on the group and provide for the group, and vice versa. So there's a sort of a clear brotherhood that you also bring to the table. I mean, I did my military service 24 years ago. I still have a daily contact with 10 of those guys. We have a chat that is ongoing and has been ongoing ever since. So there's a sense of brotherhood, but also accomplishment. Like we talked about sacrifice. Like for one of these, we took the Green Beret. Like you're walking for 100 hours without sleep, barely anything to eat, and you're not able to push it through without the man next to you or the guy next to you, and you support each other. And I think that is an important lesson that a lot of generations between when I did military service and now have lost. Because it's all been about them, about me. And that creates a very sort of egocentric sort of point of view and mindset.
Yeah. Yeah, and for this channel, of course, it's the boys that are the most relevant and interesting. And I really think that is one of the last things. Luckily, in some ways, it's coming a little bit back now as well.
Yeah.
But in Denmark, we've just passed this law now that men and women have to be treated completely equally in all processes of, the selection and the military, basic conscription process.
Yeah.
And I see in my own group, just the girls, as you say, I think we train girls from when they're very young that they should be like, self-sufficient and independent and strong and be able to, compete with the men. And they're good they do that then. And a lot of the men aren't encouraged, actually. I think your son's very lucky to have you as a father because he has a role model to do that. But a lot of boys today don't have that role model. And the mainstream culture is not telling these things, actually.
No,
the mainstream
not at
culture is
all.
mainly telling them, you need to be vulnerable. You need to be in touch with your feelings. You need to be able to express yourself, which I actually don't think helps boys at all.
No. Not
I
at
think
all.
that can come later on in life, perhaps. First, you need to be able to create value, to be able to withstand pressure, to be able to, have fortitude and be stoic.
Yeah.
Anyway, but
no, and going back to what we talked about before, I think this is where Islam has an upper hand on our society, in the sense of like they very clearly from an early stage tell girls, you are a girl and this is what expected from you, and you are a boy and this is what is expected from you. So
and the girls, but the highest model for them is to be a mother. And for my wife now, she went off and traveled the world and did all kinds of different jobs and believed that she could be anything, right? And she was strong and independent. She lived in Africa and did all kinds of different projects and stuff like that. And today she's just, she's found her real niche, and that's being, she stays at home with our kids and she makes food for us, and she's looking after our home. She's creating this beautiful home out on a farm, and it's very much like her grandmother's farm, right? And I think for her, that's been a massive gift for her. We don't believe in that mother role at all anymore, right?
And this is what people sort of seem to miss, is that job, because it is a job, it's just as important, if not more important, than your job. Because she is taking care of the family, you're making sure that there's sort of food on the table, but both are equally important. And this is where people get lost in the discussion about equality, so to say.
Yeah, I'd say my wife's job is far more important, actually, because I'm just providing the outer,
right,
that we have the finances to live for, but she's imparting values to our children on an everyday molecule by molecule basis of forming their personalities, who they are, giving them that basic sense of security of being in the world, that they can then take with them out into the future and be forming the next generation, right? Whereas I have less time with them. I try. Luckily, I work right next to where they are. But
and this is an interesting fact, because now, if you look in the Social Democrats, for example, what they want to do, they want to enforce mandatory preschool from the age of 3. Because they, again, want to make sure that the state take care of your kids, not yourself. And that
I was
they
shocked to
see it.
find out that there's mandatory school in Sweden, so you can't even homeschool if you want to. So you're forced to
Yeah,
have your children indoctrinated by the state.
yeah.
That is really scary for me, and I'm, yeah, that's enough to convince me I would never want to be there, just
No,
like
and you
that
see the
force.
same development in the US where more and more people are homeschooling their kids
Yeah,
for the simple fact that they see that the state and the schools within the state are not necessarily working for their best interests, so to say.
yeah. Good. Okay, we'll draw to a close here. Maybe, Rickard, I'm going to try to take up a little bit of a level. I read a book recently, so we'll finish off with this. It's by a
Yeah.
guy called Father Seraphim Rose. He grew up in
Mm.
California in the kind of hippie movement times, was very much a part of that entire thing. He was a student under Alan Watts, who was this
Oh,
kind of like yoga. He was an Anglican priest, but then went off into all kinds of other forms of spirituality. Still listened to very widely today. But Father Seraphim Rose at some point realized he saw actually Alan Watts as a bit of a charlatan, and a kind of this guy was making a cult of personality of himself, and went further on his search and ended up then converting to Orthodox Christianity, became an Orthodox monk. And many people would say he's a saint. Actually, he really has a very, very unique man in many one really amazing ways. But he wrote a book, and the title of the book was called Nihilism.
mm,
And he made the point that a lot of our culture is built on a very thin foundation. He actually traced it down to Friedrich Nietzsche.
mm,
And what he says is Nietzsche wrote about nihilism. He wrote that the most absolute things, the highest truths, are all losing their value and becoming degraded. None of
yeah,
us believe. All truth is now relative. It's my truth versus your truth. So there's no
yeah,
absolute truths anymore. And so he kind of saw that as this step that's now been really implemented pretty much everywhere. You know, that there's one thing that we can agree about. There's actually, so he pointed out, he says, there's one absolute truth, and that is that there's no absolute truths.
mm,
And of course, that as a metaphysics, that's a contradiction. So
yeah,
we've built our entire society on a self-contradiction,
yeah,
saying that there's no absolute truth, but that itself is an absolute truth.
yeah.
So one could say, is that the foundation that's causing the crumbling of our things?
I believe so, and I think again this quote from Nietzsche. We probably discussed this before. This sort of God is dead, and people take that as a sort of a sticker, but
Yeah.
they never take this next part. Is that, and I'm not going to quote it exactly, but it's like, and we'll wash our hands in blood for like quite some time, because again it will create chaos. So Nietzsche wasn't like, God is dead, you can do whatever you want. He's like, no, this is a problem. Like, like, because once you kill the truth, or like the highest sort of aspiration for truth, at least, then what's left? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, I think many people are turning to find something now, and for the
Mm,
first time, I'm meeting people all over the place who are exploring spirituality for the first time. Some of them Christianity, some of them Buddhism, some of them
mm,
other New Age systems or something like that. And that's an interesting journey. There's a lot more craziness
yeah.
coming out as well, and all kinds of stuff. So
No, but
yeah,
I do see, and this is again like based on sort of the development in the US and the pods I follow, is that there's a sort of an awakening in Christianity, but outside of the traditional churches. That is the very much like a lot of veterans in the US, for example, are turning their faith to God. Even some of them like actually through psychedelic experiences, like that sort of they have an awakening and realizing that, because a lot of them deal with trauma and PTSD, etc., etc. But they find a way, not through someone telling them, like, pushing them, but to sort of there is an awakening. And I see that movement again, mentioned Jordan Peterson, for example, is they're finding their way to faith through people like him that sort of can break it down, that make it relevant for them, and also people like you that sort of you approach it from a different angle, and not necessarily the sort of the old dogma that's been sort of imprinted on us from decades and decades, so to say.
My approach was very much when I came back into Christianity what's it now, 7 years ago. Um, I knew that an integrated part of Christianity is being a part of a church. But I also knew that the church that I kind of knew had all kinds of issues with it that I didn't feel were right. Mainly, I felt that Christianity had been cut off from its roots and had adopted many of the fundamental assumptions of the mainstream society, the liberal society that I was living in. And so I kind of set out, and a really important thing for me was to find good men that I could engage with. And have the word you use is integrity a lot. I really like it that you use that word, because it's a little bit hard to put your finger on, but it's something about like things being coherent and fitting together and making sense. And I really found somehow my path into Christianity was this experience of like suddenly the world clicking into place in a much more coherent way. And I was looking for more of that and having that kind of connection with other guys, because that's been my experience before I came to Christianity of being in men's work. Is I'd meet guys, and when we spoke with each other, we could really get much deeper on understanding of things, and everything kind of fell into place.
And I think the thing about integrity is that there's clear boundaries for yourself. And everyone, each individual set those boundaries for themselves. And that, I think, talking about religion and so on, I think that's that sort of going back to boundaries and clear integrity.
Yeah. I mean, so Rickard, that's where it would be different a little bit. I think when you say each individual sets their boundaries for themselves, then for me, there's nothing that can stop me from saying, well, I'm a cat. That's my boundary.
Yes.
So for me, there needs to be shared common boundaries. There isn't just relative truths. There are absolute truths.
Yeah.
And so I have faith that there are absolute truths. I don't think I know them all myself yet, but I believe that I can have them revealed to me.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. And I think that's where sort of people get lost in the sort of the identification process, is that they think that they can become whatever. It's like, no, you can't become whatever. There are clear boundaries to what you can, who you are and what you can become, so to say.
Yeah. And so we can receive that from different ways. We can gain that through experience, or we can gain that through faith. And I think there's need for both. We can't rely exclusively on experience, because then we have to go out and experience everything. We don't go jumping off 10-story buildings. We take it on faith that that's going to kill you if you try it, or at least injure you very severely.
But that goes back to, I think, my perception of fatherhood is that sort of the distance between where you're like protecting your child and where they have to make their own mistakes, and making sure that there's a sort of a possibility for them to take themselves back up. Because like I mentioned before, like my truth in terms of parenthood is that prepare my kids for a time when I'm not even around, whether I'm dead or not even present, is that at least they have a clear understanding of how things works, but more importantly, that they can take care of themselves.
Yeah, I would agree completely, and I would formulate it that way: as I want to give my child an ability to relate to the absolute themselves, like a first-hand experience of it. If they're just relying on my experience of the absolute, then it's going to be limited. And it's not going to be able to follow them in the new situations that they're going to be facing.
And the only way there is through experience, really.
Yeah, it's through experience, but also teaching them what to put their faith in, right? So a lot of people have experienced in the last 20 years, like putting our faith in science. Well, science is now telling you that you can choose your gender, and everybody has to put masks on if there's anything like a COVID virus or something like that. But
you give them a compass. That's what you give them, a compass, so they know where the true north is. But the rest they have to figure out themselves.
Good. Yeah. And so and for me, what I found is that there's this disconnect between head and body in Western society. I trace that personally to this is going to be my own personal little theory. There was something called the Great Schism that happened in 1054, where the Christian church separated itself from the head, because there was the head of the church has always been Jesus Christ. But there was one man, that was namely the Pope of Rome, who decided, I want to be the head. And so he gave himself power over the entire church. That was never the case before 1054. Popes of Rome always were just a part of a college of patriarchs in Jerusalem and Alexandria and Antioch, all these different patriarchs. And so then there was that the Pope of Rome decided, well, I'm going to be, so we put all of the power and our focus and attention onto the head of one man, who's obviously a fallible man. And, you know, that became this overinflated, overly powerful head that then ended up creating a rebellion, which was the Protestant Reformation, which then exploded into, today we have 30,000 different denominations. So the body kind of rebelled against the head. And that's why we have the split between head and body in our society and our faith today, I would say. So I had to go back to before that, which is, you know, which is what the Orthodox Church is really about. It's about holding on to. It's all of the other patriarchs from Alexandria, Antioch, all these other places who are still this faith. And it's a far more chaotic and mysterious and, you know, non-dogmatic system in some ways, where it's really about personal interactions with individual human beings, where you find Christ in that personal transmission, I would say, with another human being. So there's a direct line in the Orthodox Church. Also, the Catholic Church also claims to have this, but we would say that because the Catholic Church, they changed the fundamental doctrine of the Christian faith. The relationship between the Trinity, the Pope changed that unilaterally, not because of any understanding of you know, Christian theology, but because of politics. They just did it as a political thing.
The German Roman Empire.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, basically, it was pressure from the German emperors. Good. So I'll give you the final word, Rickard, to finish off this conversation here. I think we're drawing to a close.
No, but I to summarize, I think we're heading into what possibly could be an extremely challenging, but also evolving time for Swedish society and the Nordics in general. I think we do see already now in the last EU election, there's definitely a pushback to the last 25, 30 years of sort of liberalism, and also how we've sort of viewed religion, different religions. So it will be an interesting coming 20, 25 years again ahead of us in where we'll be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'll see how things go.
Yeah.
But good to have these conversations, Rickard, and hope we can continue them in the future as well.
Me too. I appreciate it. Thanks to see you again.
Good. Yeah.